Welcome to Saturday Morning Classics. We are currently reading the book The Island by T.M. Wright, and this week we're starting out with Chapter 12. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back and enjoy the story. Chapter 12, Evening. Jean Ward opened her cottage door and found Arnaud on her porch. "Oh," she said, clearly startled. "Hello." He gave her an embarrassed smile. "I was about to knock. I was going to knock." "Yes?" Jean said tentatively. "I stood here a time." "You did?" "I did, and as you appeared, my hand dreamt of being raised up and knocking." "It did? May we talk?" he asked. "I was going out," she answered. "To dinner." He looked confused. "You're not going to eat at the inn?" Yeah, I was. That's where I was going." "We can go together?" She hesitated. "Of course, if not," Arnaud began. But she cut in. "Yes, together. I'd like the company." She stepped out onto the porch. Arnaud got a whiff of her perfume, a slight, pleasant smell. "I like your perfume," he said. "Thank you." "Chicken piccata." "Sorry?" "The special at the inn." Oh. They went down the porch steps and turned left to walk the lighted path to the inn. After a few steps, Arnaud stopped and turned his gaze toward Dog Island, visible as a narrow, cream-colored line in the moonlight. Jean kept walking for a dozen feet, then looked back. Arnaud didn't notice at once that she was looking. She thought that, in the yellow glow of the plastic lanterns, he looked very large against the darkness, and yet very fragile, too, like a huge candle burning. She had no idea why such an image would come to her. She did not believe that she knew him at all well, certainly not well enough for such images to mean anything. She called to him, "Is there a problem?" He shook his head a little, but did not turn to look at her. "Arnaud?" she called again. He gave her a quick and expressionless look, then turned his gaze once again on Dog Island. He gestured at it. "It's like a living thing," he said. "What is?" "The island." She looked. She saw what he saw, a narrow, cream-colored sliver of light. There were stars above it, and they were reflected in the black surface of the lake. The island moved as she watched it. It shivered, arched, settled back. Arnaud said, "The earth promises life." Jean said nothing. Arnaud said, "Martha used to say that. I believe it." "Martha is your wife?" "Yes, was." He paused. "The earth promises life," he repeated, as if to himself. "All we have is life." "And memory," Jean said, wondering at once where the observation had come from. But Arnaud had no response to that, and they finished their short walk to the inn in silence. He had gone to Jean's cottage with the idea that something more than a friendship might develop. So over dinner, he let go of thoughts of his wife as much as possible, and he spoke with Jean as he would any woman he found interesting. After a while, the subject of Jean's brother was broached. She said that he was stable, doing well. Then she smiled feebly and admitted that he was simply holding on, I think. Just holding on. "I'm sorry," Arnaud said. Surprising him, Jean asked, "Do you ever wish that you were immortal?" And surprising her, Arnaud smiled and answered, "I am." January 19th. Harry Stans told Lynette, "That John Kennedy fella, the one they was looking for out on Dog Island, well, they never found him, Lynette. You remember I was telling you about him?" She nodded. They were in Harry's pickup truck on the way to Many Pines. Pete Jr. was sitting between them, sullen because he did not want to be sitting next to Harry after Harry had threatened him several evenings before. "You ain't gonna tell no damn thing, Pete," he had said. Pete was thinking over and over, "Damn it, I don't want to be here." Lynette said, "Ain't what I heard. I heard they found him. I heard he drowned and they found him." "Who'd you hear that from? Sounds like crap to me." "I heard it at the Many Pines," she answered, eyes straight ahead. Pete glanced at her, stopped his mental incantation of, "Damn it, what am I doing here?" long enough to wonder what was wrong with her, then looked away. Harry slowed the truck around a long, snow-slick curve, picked up speed, smiled, and said, "Those people there are addlepated, you know." "They're not no more addlepated than you are, or me, and it's what I heard. I heard they found this man's body, and he was drowned, and it was the same man you was talking about." She glanced at him. "This John Kennedy." Harry harumphed. Pete looked at him. Harry scowled at Pete, then looked at Lynette as if to check whether she'd seen him scowl. Pete looked at her, saw that her eyes were still on the road ahead. Harry said, "Well, I heard it from Tom Lord, and he knows one of the deputy sheriffs." "No, he don't," Pete said and looked at him. Harry scowled at him again. Pete looked away. "Well, we're almost there," Lynette said, nodding. "It's around that bend, and it's on the right, real quick, too, Harry. So you slow down, or we're going to slide right on past it." "Shit, woman, I know where in hell the damn Many Pines Inn is at." He put the truck in lower gear. The engine growled. The truck slowed. "Didn't my uncle work there once? I told you that." Many Pines came into view on the right, its parking lots and lawns covered by a blanket of fresh snow that had begun to melt now under a bright mid-morning sun. Lynette pointed at a small rectangular sign that read Many Pines Entrance. "It's there, Harry," she declared. "Slow down." But when Harry applied the brake, the truck skidded on the wet road and stopped a dozen feet beyond the entrance. Lynette looked back. "Damn it, Harry! Damn it, I told you!" "Shit," Harry grumbled, put the truck in reverse, backed it up to the entrance, and pulled in. Arnaud was writing a letter to his daughter, Mary. "I do not like it, I think," he wrote. "Perhaps it is the cold of the winter, and perhaps I am being a 49-year-old man who does not want to be a 50-year-old man alone, and it is very alone here." He was interrupted by a knock at his office door. He looked up from his letter, waited for another knock. He did not want to be interrupted, and he thought that if he didn't answer at once, then whoever was at his door would go away. But there was another knock, and he called out, "Yes?" The door opened. The caretaker, Francis Carden, stuck his head in. Carden was a tall, thin, congenial man of 60 who had a long face and lively gray eyes. He'd been at Many Pines for nearly 2 years. "Arnaud," he said. His voice was very low-pitched. "We have got to talk. We have really got to talk." Arnaud said, "Yes, okay, come in." Carden came in and sat on a small gray love seat at right angles to Arnaud's desk, with his long arms draped on the back of the love seat so that his big hands dangled over the front. He smiled. It was a broad smile, very toothy, and it crinkled the folds of skin around his eyes. "We have a problem, Arnaud." problem? We're going to have snow deep enough to hide elephants in within the next few days, if the scuttlebutt I hear is true." "I have often seen the snow fall, but never so much as that," Arnaud replied. Francis grinned. "It was a joke, Arnaud." "I am complacent of that," he smiled. "I have a little Armenian in my accent, true, but I'm not quite so stupid as a placemat." Francis's grin became a smile. "We've never talked much, have we?" "We have dissimilar duties here at this place." Francis shook his head. "No, we don't. We have just never talked much." He paused very briefly. "Let's talk sometime, okay?" Arnaud nodded. He'd never been sure how to react to Francis Carden. He had often thought that the man was trifling with him. "Yes," he said now, "we'll talk sometime. I've you ahead of me about it." "You mean you look forward to it?" "I'm sorry, but I don't run with this language as well as most anybody. Now, please, Francis, what is it about the snowfall deep as elephants?" Francis nodded. "Yeah, I'm sorry. We were straying, weren't we? I wanted to tell you that we're going to have to move the snow around once it gets here." "There are shovels," Arnaud said, "and the snow thrower." "They won't do shit with the kind of snow we're going to get, Arnaud. I'm sorry. We need something bigger. We need a tractor, a snowcat." A knock at the door interrupted him. He answered it. Lynette Meyer had arrived, and she was ready to start work. History, November 14th, 1976. Anita Mosiman said, "We're out of wood, Ben." He looked at her from his chair across the living room. "What do you mean we're out of wood? How could we be out of wood? I just bought half a cord." "No, dear." She gave him a flat, long-suffering smile. "You didn't just buy it. You bought it a month ago. It's been awfully cold since then, and we've used it up." Ben sighed. "Why are you telling me?" "Only that when we're out of something, we usually go and get more of whatever it is we're out of. We're out of firewood. So what I'm telling you is that we should go and get more." "What you're telling me is that I should go and get more." She came across the room, leaned over, kissed him on the forehead. "One of the advantages of being married so long," she told him, straightening, "is that we don't have to say what we mean. Thank you. I'll have lunch ready when you get back." He sighed once more, stood, shoved his hands into his pockets, pulled them out again. "Do you have the keys to the boat?" "No, Dad does. I'll go and wake him." Joe Archer had gone to his room for what he'd explain was a morning nap. Ben shook his head. "No, don't wake him. He'll want to go with me." "What's wrong with that?" Ben shrugged. "Nothing, I guess." He looked away, as if embarrassed. "We haven't been getting along lately." "Oh?" He looked at her, shrugged again. "It's no big thing. He believes that I patronize him. I don't, of course. I treat him as an equal. He's got to realize, Anita, that his age and his condition impose certain limitations on him." "What limitations?" He scowled. "What do you mean, what limitations? He's an old man, and he's not well besides. So, as a consequence, he's not able to do the things that he used to do." She cut in. "He fixed the refrigerator yesterday." Ben shook his head. "Damn it, Anita, I told him not to touch it. Those damn things can be dangerous." "Well, it's working again, Ben, and as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding." "Oh, that's catchy, Anita. I'll jot it down and put it in my wallet." She gave him an exasperated look. Get some aspirin while you're in town, too, okay? I've got a headache. Hell, I've had it since I got up. Join the club, he said. He crossed the room, looked back. I'll wake him. If he wants to come with me, fine. Thanks, Ben, she smiled. Every day it becomes clearer to me why I love you so much. Chapter 13. Evening. Jean Ward said to Arnaud over dinner, "This is the first time you've reopened the inn this late?" He nodded. She seemed tense, he thought. "It is," he said. "Repairs aplenty abound, and so—" He nodded to indicate her plate of swordfish steak and the green salad next to it. "You are vacuous?" "Excuse me? Vacuous?" "A vacuum. Yes, nothing inside." "I'm sorry?" "It's okay. We have a cat." "Oh," she said, understanding him at last. A small, clearly false smile played on her lips, then vanished. "No, I'm not hungry," she said. "I'm sorry." Arnaud looked distressed. "There's something fishy with it?" He grinned, aware of the unintentional joke he'd made. She shook her head. He thought, in so many words, that she was good to look at. "There's nothing wrong with it, Arnaud. I'm sure it's delicious." "No," he cut in. "It's tough and chewy, and you're right to keep it away from your stomach. I think that my cook wants to beat a hasty retrieval before the cold snaps." Jean said, "It's not that, Arnaud. My brother died this morning." Arnaud looked fixedly at her. There was nothing he could say, and he knew it. He waited for her to continue. After a moment, she did. "Complications of pneumonia. They said he died of complications of pneumonia." Arnaud put his fork down. Jean went on. "I thought only old people died of that, Arnaud." She had been looking at him. Now she looked down at her plate. He wanted to reach across the small table and take her hand, but there was a basket of bread in his way, and a carafe of red wine, and 2 tall silver candlesticks, and he knew that he'd have to move all these things, or move his chair, or reach wide around the edges of the table to take her hand. So he said, "I'm sorry," and thought it was not enough. How could it be? How could it even nudge the grief she was feeling? He added, "You seem a woman with strength," because he thought she was. Hadn't she accepted his dinner invitation very graciously, without a hint that there was something wrong? Hadn't she carried on a light conversation for a few minutes when he'd picked her up at her cabin? "I'm sorry," he said again. She shook her head. "It's not right that I'm here, Arnaud. Forgive me. I think I've misled you in accepting your invitation." Arnaud shook his head quickly. No, you need to adhere with someone these moments and in these griefs." "I didn't like him," she said flatly. She closed her eyes a moment, opened them, repeated, "I didn't like him. No one did, really." Arnaud wanted again to say something, knew again there was nothing he could say. Jean went on with a wan smile. "He was unlikable, that's all. I can't defend it. Anything. Him." She closed her eyes again, opened them. "I'm making no sense." She shook her head. "I don't need to, though. There are times in life when we don't need to make sense. This is one of those times." "I understand that," Arnaud said. "I know you do." She nodded once. "Can you help me with the arrangements, Arnaud? Sending him back home? I would simply like you to be with me when I do that. I'll take up an hour or 2 of your time." "I'll do that," Arnaud said, his voice husky from the sorrow he was feeling for her. "It is my needs." She stood. "I'll go back to my cottage now," Arnaud said, also standing. "I understand. I do. I understand. I'll walk you back." She looked at him a moment. "You're a nice man, Arnaud. I like you." "Yes, thank you," he said, feeling suddenly foolish and not knowing why. "Thank you," he repeated and looked quickly about the dining room. The Romans were chatting over dessert at a table at the other end of the room. Muriel Fox was dining alone close to the kitchen. Jeff and Amy Glynn were just then coming in, their daughter Samantha and her portable bassinet. Arnaud said, Of course, such feelings as that swim together. Yes, I like you too." Jean nodded a little, said, "I'll find my way back, Arnaud. Thanks anyway." Arnaud was disappointed by this. "Of course," he said, "I understand, if you incubate passions for chit-chat." She came around the table, touched his hand gently, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed him on the cheek. She whispered, "Thank you, Arnaud, but I have someone to talk to." History. The Mosimans stored firewood in a large shed near the back of the house. The shed had a tar paper roof and chicken wire walls. This gave the wood protection from rain and snow, but still allowed it to dry easily. Ben despised getting a load of firewood because it was a hell of a lot of hard work. Half a cord took up most of the interior of the family's old Buick wagon, and loading the wood safely into the powerboat for transporting nearly a mile across 7th Lake to the house on the island required 3 trips back and forth. And today, because Anita's father had complained of chest pains, it was a job that Ben was doing alone. He was carrying an armload of wood from the dock to the shed when he noticed that the crack in the stilt at the back of the house had lengthened and widened, as if the stilt itself had bent slightly. He put the firewood in the shed and went back for a closer inspection. He bent over and fingered the crack. It was horizontal and extended nearly 180 degrees along the stilt. He sniffed his finger. Faintly, he smelled the tangy odor of sap. He thought it was odd that the crack seemed to have widened, that he could nearly get his little finger into it. If it really had widened, he realized, it meant that the house itself was shimmying forward, a prospect he found disturbing. He stepped back and sideways so he could get a view of the stilt that would allow him to judge whether it had bent forward toward the lake. He cocked his head, closed one eye. "Hell," he whispered, found a thin branch that had fallen from a tree, and held it up like a plumb line several yards from the house so the stilt was behind it. Yes, he decided at last, the stilt was clearly leaning forward toward the lake, and that meant that he had to check the stilts at the front of the house as well for the same kind of misalignment. He'd need to walk in the water to do that, and now, in mid-November, the lake was very cold. Anita opened the back door and stuck her head out. "Did you get the aspirin, Ben?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, it's in the boat." "I could use it." She looked tired, Ben thought. He said, "Sure, when I'm done here." His own headache had gone away. "What are you doing?" He shook his head. He did not want to tell her what he was doing for fear that he would alarm her. "Nothing," he said. "Playing." He smiled a little. "Playing?" He nodded. "Checking this." He indicated the cracked stilt. "It seems okay, no worse than it was." She nodded, as if in acknowledgement. "Could you go and get the aspirin, Ben? I'm afraid that Max and Catherine don't feel well either." He gave her a concerned look. "Man, I hope it's not something we ate. How's your father?" She shook her head quickly. "I haven't checked on him." "Well, maybe you'd better." He considered a moment and then told her, "I'm okay. My headache's gone. I think the fresh air helped." "Uh-huh," she said, as if unconvinced. "Fresh air." She closed her eyes. Ben thought again that she looked very tired. She added, "Please, Ben, the aspirin." And then she went inside. When Ben was halfway down the dock to the boat, he heard Anita call, "Ben, hurry! Ben, please, it's Dad!" Chapter 14. Walt and Mitzi Roman were lying in bed. Neither one could sleep. Mitzi was staring at the white, high-gloss enamel of the doorframe. The room was dark, and across from the bed was a large, oblong mirror. And she wondered if she had just that moment noticed it, or if her eyes had merely needed more time to adjust. She closed them a moment. "Don't open them," she told herself, rolled over in bed, and looked at her husband, whose eyes were wide open. "What's wrong?" she asked him. "Fire's out," Walt told her. "No, I don't think so. I can see the glow reflected in the mirror." No, it's out. It's cold in here." "Well, go to sleep," she said. "Can't sleep," he said. Suddenly, the dark shape of a man appeared in the doorway. Mitzi took a quick, deep breath. She could make out the man's face just faintly, as if she were seeing the face of an owl at night. And she could see, too, that his arms hung limply at his sides and that his fingers were extended. "Walt! Someone's there!" Arnaud blinked at Lynette Meyer, who had knocked at his bedroom door and awakened him. "Yes? Hello?" he said. She was dressed as if for a day's work, he noticed, in a pair of brown pants and an oversized white blouse and sneakers. She said, nodding to her right, "I thought you should know there's trouble in one of the cabins. I heard it. People fighting." He had been in a very deep sleep, and now was having difficulty pulling reality back to him. "Yes?" he said. "Trouble in one of the cabins?" He only mouthed the words. He did not assimilate what she had said. "A fight," she said. "Some kind of fight, Mr. Burge." He was dressed in a pair of blue pajamas. He looked down at himself. "I am not dressed. A fight? What fight?" "In one of the cabins. Those people had a fight in one of the cabins." He was coming around now. "Which cabin?" "How the hell should I know which cabin, Mr. Burge? I think it's your duty to go down there and find out which cabin, don't you?" "And right quick, too, I'd say," she snapped. "Now you'll excuse me. I got my work, Mr. Burge. We all of us got our work." Then she turned to her left, marched down the hall, and disappeared down a north-south corridor. "Fight?" whispered Arnaud. "What fight?" He heard a door being opened down the corridor. A second later he heard the door close. Odd, he thought, because the room he'd given her and Pete, Jr., was in the other half of the inn. He went back into his dark room, to a window that overlooked the cabins 100 yards away. He looked out. He saw that the bright yellow porch spotlight was on over the center cabin, where Walt and Mitzi Roman were staying. Its glow illuminated new snow on the cabin's porch roof and much of the area in front of the cabin, including the beach and 10 feet or so of thin ice. He could see, just as well, the small moving shadows of a snowfall just starting. The shadows were cast upon his window by the spotlight on the Roman's cabin and gave what he was seeing an exaggerated 3-dimensional effect, as if he were looking through a tunnel, and the falling snow, the cabin, and the bright yellow spotlight were somewhere beyond it. His phone rang. "Good Lord," he whispered, startled. He quickly crossed the room and snatched the phone up on the second ring. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad. Have you got room in the inn for a long-lost daughter?" "Mary?" "The same. Can you come get me?" "Where are you?" "In Eagle Bay. I could walk if you'd like." "You're joking." A chuckle. "Yes, Dad, I'm joking. I need a ride. Do you still drive like a madman?" "I don't drive like a madman. Mary, you didn't call. You didn't write. It's so advantageous to be hearing you." "It's good to hear your voice, too, Dad." "Where are you?" "I'm at the firehouse. You know where that is, right?" Arnaud nodded. "Yes, Mary." Dad, I would have hitchhiked the rest of the way, but it's late. You understand. Don't hitchhike, Mary. The car is available to me, and I am all but dressed. I'll wait for you, Dad. Another chuckle. Thanks. I can't wait to see you. I've got lots to talk about. Bye. She hung up. Arnaud had not yet turned on the light in the room. It was an oversight. He had always told himself that he did not like dark rooms at the inn, but he had found that he often forgot to turn lights on, and that he made his way around well enough in the dark. When he realized his oversight, he usually corrected it almost at once. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he stood quietly in the darkness and let it do what it had always done to him, wrap him up and make him feel cold and warm at the same time, as if he were sliding into a sweet and welcome and temporary death. There were times when he thought that it was like drinking something that shocked the tongue at first, but which, once swallowed, left a wonderful aftertaste. Hard cider did that to him. He had, in fact, once written to Mary, "The darkness here at the inn is like apple cider." That is where he left it, and when Mary wrote back, "What does that mean, Dad?" he had not answered her because he thought it had been a silly observation. Tonight, he stood quietly for a minute, even though the urgencies of the moment, the disturbance in one of the cabins below, Mary's unexpected phone call, were nudging him. And as he stood in this room, the darkness did again what it had always done ever since he had been a child. It wrapped him up and hugged him tight, and made his skin cold and his insides warm and his spirit comfortable. He thought then that it was not so much the darkness that did this to him, but simply the absence of light and the presence only of shadows to represent the paraphernalia of his life. His desk, his couch, his bed, the lamps, the telephone, all became simply rough-edged shadows that undulated softly, as if there were small insects on them. It made him shudder. It made him warm. It made him smile. And he had thought more than once that, if he wished hard enough, his dead wife, Martha, could be among those shadows. He switched on the lamp near the telephone. Chapter 15. Change occurs quickly in the Adirondacks. Temperatures rise and fall as if on a whim. The darkness happens all at once, with only a nod to twilight. Autumn ends like the closing of a door. It is a place of contrasts, a place where the colors of the land do not bleed together, but are as sharply delineated, as exquisite and mundane as the words of a lover. It is a place that does not embrace, but holds and keeps, a place that does not need its people, but tolerates them and gives them life, pain, acceleration. The cabin where the Romans were staying was the largest of many Pines cabins. It had 3 bedrooms, each large enough for 2 twin beds, a dresser, and an end table, a good-sized kitchen with table and chairs at the back of the cabin, and in front a living room with fireplace, armless green vinyl couch, 2 brown vinyl loungers, and 2 pine end tables. The bathroom was between 2 of the bedrooms. All the rooms were accessible from a long, narrow hallway. There was a small window halfway down this hallway. It was the only window on the cabin's south side, the side facing away from the main inn. The cabin's attic had been converted years before for use as a 4th bedroom, and access to it was by a stairway built into the outside back wall. This stairway, as well as the attic bedroom, had not seen regular use or maintenance for over a decade, and the wood was succumbing to rot. It was from this stairway that Walt Roman had fallen while in pursuit of the man who'd come into his bedroom. Walt was seated in the kitchen when Arnaud arrived. He had his right leg up on a chair, a cup of black coffee in front of him, and he was wearing only a red-checked robe and blue corduroy slippers. The robe covered him at mid-thigh and was open down to his navel. His legs and chest bore a thick mat of coarse, dark hair, and Arnaud stared a moment when he came into the kitchen because he had never before seen so much hair on a man's body. Mitzi Roman was seated across from him at the small, enamel-topped table. She had a cup of cocoa in front of her. There was a marshmallow, half melted, floating in it. Arnaud, embarrassed, said, "What transcendence is this, Mr. Roman? Lynette Meyer said there was a problem." He noticed that Walt's leg was swollen around the knee. He went on, "A bulbous thing there, Mr. Roman. My car is in waiting, and I was anyway just now going with it out to Eagle Bay. Ride with me, and I will afford you to the hospital." Walt Roman said, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. Walt Roman said, eyes fixed on his coffee cup, "There was a man here, Arnaud. He scared the holy crap out of my wife, and he knocked me off the stairs. And what I got to ask you, Arnaud, is what the hell you're going to do about it?" Arnaud gestured at the chair between Mitzi and Walt. "May I sit?" "Help yourself," Walt said. Arnaud sat, folded his hands on the tabletop. "You have gone in search of this man?" Mitzi said, "That's how he fell, damn it, off your rotten stairs." "Yes," said Arnaud. Only a week before he had made a mental note to have Francis Carden repair those stairs. He looked at Mitzi. She fished the half-melted marshmallow from the cocoa with her spoon and ate it. Arnaud went on, "I understand, and my apologies are residing in you." "Yeah, whatever," Mitzi said, clearly skeptical. Arnaud looked at Walt. "You think this person went into the attic?" "How could he?" Walt asked. "If I couldn't get up those stairs without falling through, he couldn't have either." "But you visualized him there." "What? What the hell are you talking about?" "He means," Mitzi said, "did you see the guy go up there into the attic?" Walt nodded, grumbled. "Uh-huh, I did," sipped his coffee, set the cup down, and pulled his robe closed around him. "It's damn cold, Arnaud. You ought to have some damn heat that works in these places." "Again, my apologies dwell within you, and my invitation still exists to ride with me to the hospital in Eagle Bay." Walt shook his head. "I'm okay." A short pause, then, "I'm going to sue you, Arnaud. You realize that, don't you?" "You're going to sue me, Mr. Roman?" Arnaud was flabbergasted. Walt nodded. He smiled again. "It's a clear case of negligence. Mitzi thinks so, too. We both think we've got a litigious situation here." Mitzi said, smiling, "Damn sure of it, in fact." Arnaud said quietly, "I have no money, Mr. Roman. Whatever I have, though, I am delirious to share with you in the prospects of further good health." Walt shook his head. "That won't work, Mr. Burge. I know it's an act. Mitzi knows it's an act. The damn walls know it's an act. You got yourself a gold mine here, and you figure as long as you pretend to be some dumb foreign type." Arnaud stood at once. "Pardon me, please. I am going to visualize into the attic space, and then I'll be gone." Walt shrugged, and then winced and grabbed his knee. Mitzi said, "Are you all right, honey?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not. I have a lot of pain." He looked at Arnaud. "I'll take that ride, Mr. Burge." Arnaud hesitated only a moment. "Certainly," he said. "Give me some moments up there." He pointed at the attic. History. "This is why it was a mistake to come here," Ben Mosiman hissed. Anita, who had her father's ankles in hand, Ben was carrying him under his arms, said, without looking up at her husband, "Shut up. Just please shut up." "It's simply not right for people to live without a telephone, Anita. It's not right." They were at the boat dock now, alongside the boat. The children, Max and Catherine, were watching quietly, open-mouthed, from not far away. Ben went on, nodding at the boat. We've got to do this together, Anita. Together? Yes, we'll each put a foot in at the same time, then we'll lower him carefully into the boat, okay? Joe Archer was semi-conscious, his breathing labored, his skin color a light blue. We'll tip the boat if we do that, Ben. He shook his head. No, it'll be okay. Ben, I'm telling you, we'll tip the damned boat. He closed his eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and said slowly, We will not tip the boat, Anita. Now, on 3. He's gonna die, isn't he? Anita said. No, Ben said. He'll be fine. Now, 1, 2, 3. They stepped into the boat at the same time. It tilted precariously. Water flowed over the gunwale. Ben snapped, Quick! Put him down now, in the center. Joe Archer was not a heavy man, but Anita's muscles were tired from carrying him so far, and when she swung his body over the edge of the dock toward the center of the boat, her left hand slipped first, then her right, and Joe's feet hit the side of the aluminum boat. He groaned. Ben leaned forward to balance the shifting weight and set Joe's upper body down in the center. The boat righted. Water flowed around Joe's head, reaching to his ears. Joe whispered, My God! My God! Ben motioned to Anita. Put his feet in. Anita did. He looked at Max and Catherine. We'll be back before long. You'll be all right. Your grandfather will be all right. He was aware that he sounded like he was babbling. He pointed at a seat cushion near Anita. Give me that. She did. He propped Joe's head up on it, and moments later they were on their way to shore. The half-hour ride to Eagle Bay had so far been made in silence. Walt Roman had positioned himself catty-corner in the cab of Arnaud's Jeep Cherokee, with his swollen right leg propped up so his foot was on top of the dashboard, only inches from the steering wheel. It was an awkward position, and he had been doing a lot of shifting about trying to make himself comfortable. Except for his right foot, which had only an argyle sock on it because the foot had begun to swell, he was dressed warmly. When he wasn't shifting about, he kept his gaze straight ahead, as if to help Arnaud see through the dense snowfall that had started shortly before they'd left the inn. Arnaud said, It was my real and benevolent inclination to persevere in the matter of the stairs rotting, and so I intended, truthfully, to accost Mr. Carden. Can it? Walt Roman said. Arnaud fell silent. Walt Roman said, I gotta sue you. You know that, right? If I don't sue you, then I'm an asshole. I don't understand that. Roman shifted around. His foot moved an inch or so closer to the steering wheel. He was seated now, with his back against the passenger door. What I'm saying, Mr. Burge, is that we have to recognize opportunity when we see it. And this here is a great opportunity. It's nothing personal, you understand. As a matter of fact, I like you. You're okay. You got your con game, and I got mine. We're businessmen. Con game? Arnaud asked. Yeah, your act. I have no con game, Arnaud said, and slowed the jeep. The snowfall had increased. Now there were whiteouts every few seconds, and though he had driven this stretch of road 1,000 times in the last 10 years, it still held its surprises. Many of its twists and turns were marked, but some were not, and tonight, anyway, the road signs he could see were covered by snow and unreadable. Even the feel of the tires against the road was far different than what he was used to. Normally, the Jeep's tires gave him a harsh, gritty ride that transferred itself to the wheel. Tonight, the road felt gentle and sloshy, as if he were driving on balloons. The whole aura of the ride, the whiteouts, the sloshy feel of the road, the silence, gave him a sense of separation, as if the hands he was seeing on the steering wheel were someone else's hands, as if the voices he was hearing were not his and Walt Roman's, but the voices of another conversation over which he had no control. "Uh-huh," said Walt Roman. "You got your con game, Arnaud. We all of us do. Maybe you're not even aware of it." He paused then. "This is like driving through cotton candy." "It is thick," said Arnaud, pleased that he had made such a direct statement, "and I am not in love with maneuvering in it." "Sure," said Walt Roman. "Anyway, that's why I gotta sue you, because if I don't, then I'm an asshole, and everyone will know it. Hell, you got insurance, right?" "That is at right angles to this discussion, sir." The road was bordered on both sides by thick stands of pine trees. If there was a wind, Arnaud knew, then visibility would be much better. The trees would act as a barrier. But there was no wind, and so the snow fell straight down, thick and wet, and though he kept the windshield wipers on high, the snow piled up almost at once and made him all but blind. Walt Roman said, "That bastard did go up there, into the attic. I saw him." "I saw no one," Arnaud said. Instead of risking the stairs that Walt Roman had fallen through, he had brought a ladder over from the inn and had climbed it to the attic entrance, gone inside, looked about, found nothing but twin beds made years before and never slept in, and doilies placed just so on a big mahogany dresser. There was also a black plastic ashtray on a pine end table near the bed. Overhead, the wallboard nailed to the ceiling joists had warped badly, and Arnaud supposed, seeing it, that the insulation had been installed with the moisture barrier facing the wrong way, thus trapping humidity between the wallboard and the roof. He found a bird's nest, too, under the room's one window, which faced the lake, and an empty Hellman's mayonnaise jar just under the bed. Roman said, "I can't help what you say you found, Mr. Burge. I know what I saw." The loose cloth on the elbow of his coat caught on the door handle, and several moments later, when he maneuvered himself around because the window crank was sticking into his back, he accidentally pulled the door open. Arnaud looked over, suddenly aware that the white noise of the tires on the snow was louder, and aware also of the change of pressure inside the truck. He saw a look of surprise on Roman's big, square face, and he saw amusement, too, as if the man were saying to himself that he had done something very stupid, but that it was all right because he'd fix it quickly enough. Arnaud saw also that Roman's left hand was rapidly slipping from the grip it had on the doorframe. Roman's look of amusement changed at once. Now there was only panic. Arnaud hit the brake. The truck began to slide. He let off on the brake, touched it, let off on it, touched it again. Roman lost his grip on the doorframe and silently tumbled backward into the night. The truck came to a stop. Roman's door swung back, nearly closed, then fell open once more. Arnaud threw his door open and ran around the front of the truck to where he guessed Roman should be. The snowfall was very thick now, and as he stood near the open passenger door, he supposed that he could see, in the light from inside the cab, the impression that Roman's body had made when it hit the shoulder. "Mr. Roman?" he called, and started off the road. "Mr. Roman!" He heard nothing, only the low whine of the jeep's engine. He peered past the rough circle of weak orange light cast by the overhead light in the cab. He saw only a flat and featureless darkness, as if he were looking at a child's drawing of night done in black crayon. "Mr. Roman?" he called, and took a couple of steps into that darkness. He felt the shoulder drop off sharply, imagined himself tumbling into a gully which might or might not be there. He backed away. "Mr. Roman! Please, please call to me!" There was no response. He glanced around at the truck. The cab's interior was only a pinpoint of square orange light and warmth in the cold darkness, the bluish glow of the truck's headlamps flattened and diffused by the snowfall. Arnaud whispered, "Damn it to hell." If only he knew exactly where he was, if he was just around the fourth wide turn on the road to Eagle Bay, or if he was near the little fruit stand where an old woman, whose name he could not recall, sold apples in the fall, or if he was near the sign which read Deer Crossing, next 2 miles. If he knew exactly where he was, he'd be able to mentally picture what lay in front of him, and picture as well where poor Walt Roman might be. But he knew only that he was part way to Eagle Bay, and that the snow was as dense as it had ever been, as deep as elephants, he whispered, and that unless Walt Roman called to him, there would be nothing he'd be able to do at that moment but get help from somewhere. If he maneuvered the Jeep around so its headlights pointed where Roman had fallen, he knew that they would show him only the snowfall. "Damn it! Damn it!" he whispered. He had rarely felt as helpless in the face of another person's need. "Mr. Roman!" he called. He waited. He got no reply. He called again and again. Finally, he turned, went back to the truck, closed the driver's door, maneuvered around, tried first the high beams, then the low, and drove into Eagle Bay. History. Anita and Ben dropped Joe into the water at the shore when they docked the boat. He slipped first from Ben's grip and then from Anita's, and he went sideways into 1.5 feet of water. It stunned him, made him gasp, and when he gasped, he took in a cup of water and then began to cough it up. The coughing helped. It dislodged the clot that had begun to take root in his aorta. The clot began to move again. Joe came around a bit. He became aware of where he was exactly, in the water. He panicked. He screeched, high, wheezing noises. He tried desperately to push himself up, out of the water, but his muscles had no energy. "Help me! Help me!" he whispered. But Anita and Ben had already gotten him by the shoulders and ankles and were carrying him out of the water. He saw Dog Island in those few seconds before his daughter and son-in-law turned toward where they kept the Buick parked. And when he saw the island, he made a feeble reach for it, and knew deep inside him that he would be reaching for it for a very long time, but that he would never go back to it, that death and the lake would prevent it. The clot that had been dislodged from his aorta found a new home. The young doctor on call in intensive cardiac care at St. Jerome's Hospital in Eagle Bay said, "Yes, it is a heart attack, Mrs. Mosiman, and I'm afraid it's quite serious." "How serious?" The doctor hesitated. Clearly, he was inexperienced at giving people bad news. He said at last, "I would like to tell you, Mrs. Mosiman, that there is hope, but I'm afraid that that would be misleading." Ben Mosiman cut in. "Be straight with us, please. Is my wife's father going to die?" The doctor hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir. That's my judgment. I'm sorry. His heart has sustained far too much damage." Anita Mosiman broke into tears. The doctor said, "Excuse me, please," and left the room. Beneath the numbness that overwhelmed him, Joe Archer could feel that his lips were moving, but he could not be sure that any sounds were coming out, or indeed that there was anyone in the room to hear him. Above him, the paraphernalia necessary to keep him alive were like the shapes and shadows of a dream. He knew that he was closer now to death than he was to life. But it was okay. He had expected it for quite a while. He had even thought that he would welcome it. though he realized now that that had been fanciful, had been designed to prepare himself for it. He no more welcomed death than he welcomed pain or discomfort. But his life was done. On balance, it had been good and productive and pleasurable, but now it was done, and it was foolish to deny it or to fight it. But damn it, their lives weren't done. Their lives had barely started. A nurse standing near the bed saw that Joe's eyes were wide and that his mouth was moving slightly as if his lips were dry. She bent over, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and straightened. She supposed that she was being kind, that she was ushering him out of this world with tenderness, and if circumstances had been different, if an awful turmoil had not been gripping him at that moment, she would have been right. But when she straightened, she saw his eyes crinkle up and his mouth go into an O, and she misinterpreted what she was seeing. She supposed that he was panicking at the inevitability of his death, and she became ashamed. "I'm so sorry," she told him. "I'm sorry." And she realized, not for the first time, that dying was a process to which she hated being a witness. "Propane!" Joe Archer was crying. The nurse cocked her head at him. "Propane?" That was certainly a very odd thing for a dying man to say. "Propane!" Joe Archer cried again. The nurse smiled, a flat, sad smile of recognition. Of course, the words of the dying were nonsense words. They spilled out of a memory in release, names of loved ones, long dead themselves, much-used obscenities, even words screamed during orgasm. They were the products of a memory in release, of floodgates opening. They were the sounds of a fire going out. She leaned over again so her face was close to Joe Archer's. "I understand," she whispered at him. "I understand, and I care, and I want you to know that you are not alone." "Propane!" screamed Joe Archer. She backed away because his breath smelled of his insides, of blood. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but she said nothing. She stared at him, at his agony. She told herself, at the agony of pain she knew was churning inside him, and the agony, too, of being forced to leave a place where he had lived for so long, of leaving the earth forever. "I understand," she said again, "and I'm so sorry." Then she slipped from the room. Seconds later, Joe Archer rose from his bed and fixed his gaze on the closed door. "Propane!" he screamed, and lurched toward the door like a drunk. The young doctor looked very gloomy. "I have bad news," he said. Ben Mosiman stood from his seat in the waiting room. "Mr. Archer is dead?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, sir." Anita Mosiman, still seated, wide-eyed, voice trembling, asked, When did my father die?" "Several minutes ago, Mrs. Mosiman." He paused, continued uneasily. "There were unusual circumstances." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Mosiman." He pronounced it Mosiman, and Ben corrected him. "It's Mosiman." "Yes, sir." Anita asked, her voice steady now. "What circumstances, doctor?" He shook his head again. "I shouldn't have mentioned it. I'm sorry." A pause. "He got out of his bed. For some reason, Mr. Archer got out of his bed, and he went to the door." Another pause. "And that's where we found him, behind the door. Apparently Mr. Archer was trying to leave his room. This is only conjecture, of course, but he was trying to get out of his room, and, well, he couldn't do it. He was leaning against the door, against the bottom of the door, and I'm sorry, forgive me. I shouldn't be sharing this with you. It is not germane to the fact that your father is dead, Mrs. Mosiman, Mr. Mosiman. But I think that perhaps it is germane, really. The last few moments of any man's life are germane. Please, said Anita Mosiman, but the doctor, misinterpreting her, went on. Yes, I'm sorry. Mr. Archer had his hand around the bottom of the door, which was open part way, and I would say that if he was trying to open it then, his own body prevented it. Please, Anita demanded. The doctor fell silent. Anita said, Can I see him? The doctor cocked his head. See him? I don't understand, Mrs. Mosiman, as I just explained. I know what you just explained, damn it, and I would like to see him. She emphasized each word as if the doctor were slow-witted. I would like to say goodbye to my father. May I please do that? The doctor nodded. Of course. Forgive me. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of The Island here on Saturday Morning Classics with your host, Ginger Winters. And until then, have a great week, everyone.
Say goodbye to itching and stinging and swelling with B-Itch Stop, your all-natural solution for fast relief from bug bites and stings and skin irritations of all kinds. It's made right here in Nevada with safe, all-natural ingredients. Our formula is gentle enough for all ages and skin types. Whether it's mosquito bites, bee or wasp stings, spider bites, or even cactus thorns and poison ivy, B-Itch Stop works fast to soothe and calm your skin. Get yours today. And you know you can get it right here on our site at the store. Now you just go ahead and check that out. I swear by it myself. This is Clay Steele. Take care of yourself.